For a while I couldn't make up my mind whether to make this video or not, because I don't like stepping on other people's fun. Theories are a good clean source of that most of the time, but this particular theory is an amalgamation of a lot of major problems a theory can have, while also being popular enough for some people to actually believe it's already canon information. I've had people argue about it in both my comment section and IRL, and I'm not exaggerating. I still see it brought up in videos and have received several comments from people who not only believe it's true, but talk as if it was already confirmed, or heavily implied by the story. And look at my sub count. I am not a big channel. I don't get boatloads of comments, yet it still finds its way here. I've started watching a lot of One Piece YouTube recently for discussion purposes on my side channel, and some of the largest creators will just talk about their theories like it's canon sometimes.
But it wasn't until the end of Wano that we finally learned the real secret to Sanji's strength. You see, Sanji and his siblings were genetically modified to be stronger, but what we didn't know was that Sanji's DNA was mixed with a special race known as the Lunarians. Now these Lunarians are basically
not that I exactly want to blame them, you know, it's weekly grind, you gotta say stuff with confidence in order to get reactions out of people. But this theory has stuck around far longer than it should have, I think. It's a theory bred from people misunderstanding tone and verisimilitude, while trying to over-explain everything in what is inherently a goofy and whimsical fantasy setting, while also contradicting the rules of that setting in several different ways. And despite even that, the people who believe the theory talk as if their conclusion is the more logical one. Sometimes it is also guilty of obsessing over fictional genetics to a needless degree. But more importantly, it's all wrapped into a package that is character assassination for one of my favorite Straw Hat Pirates. This video is mostly a fun excuse for me to talk about one of my favorite characters in Sanji, along with some aspects of the story I find to be undervalued by most people. Sanji's character arc in between Whole Cake Island and Wano was incredible, and most versions of this theory, if not all of them, spit on it. Now, what exactly is this theory? Obviously, different people spouting the same theory will add their own spin to things, but here's the basic idea and most of them follow. Sanji's Diable Jambe is the result of being sliced with Lunarian DNA by his father Vinsmoke Judge as part of his experiments. It sounds really simple when summarized, but that simple idea is nonsense and disprovable in many ways. Now, before I begin, I do not intend to say Sanji being part Lunarian is impossible. The human imagination is the only limitation in a fictional story. The author of a story can contrive any explanation they want for any inclusion, for better or worse. We've even seen retcons both soft and hard happen within One Piece. Luffy being a mythical zone is a soft retcon, because it technically was not impossible for him to always be one. You can say it's bad writing, and I don't even fully disagree, but regardless it's not impossible within the lore, just contrived to all heck. As for hard retcons, you can look at Katakuri being changed from a Logia in the weekly release to a special paramecia in the volume release. It arguably makes a less radical change than Luffy's Devil Fruit, but actual text and dialogue was outright deleted and replaced, making it a hard retcon. It is not impossible for either scenario to happen to Sanji. The author can either force an explanation or simply change dialogue from past volumes or insist that his authorial intent was different, as terrifying as that might sound. If Oda really wanted to, he can make Kobe Nami's father, and also Nami is a giant secretly. Like she was born a giant and then got hit with a shrink ray, and Kobe is actually a 50,000-year-old man in disguise as a young boy. If he wants to put that on the page, we can't really stop him. But putting that aside, I think a theory channel has one job, and that is to work within the lore of the story. If they want to write a fanfic, that's fine, and honestly a lot of theories read like fanfiction, even though theorists rarely admit that. And theory channels will hardly ever bring up the idea of soft or hard retcons in their videos, because doing so hurts the credibility of the practice. If a story is fluid, then they can't tell you Oda planned everything from chapter 1, and that they cracked the code to a 20-year mystery. They don't just want to predict or analyze the story, they have to sensationalize it. Half the time I can't even tell if the theorists actually believe their theories or if it's just clickbait. But regardless, they have misled enough people into thinking this particular theory is plausible or already canon. Sanji being a Lunarian might look like it makes sense at a glance, but to be absolutely clear, Sanji being a Lunarian or having Lunarian DNA does not make sense both from a character, thematic, and in-universe lore perspective, while also possibly carrying weird, problematic overtones in some interpretations of the theory. I'm basing the majority of the script off a copypasta I made a while back. And yes, I made one on this topic. It is in the description, share with anyone who earnestly believes Sanji's Lunarian. Please and thank you. Now we will go point by point, and after each one, I will address all the counter arguments I have witnessed and personally received. So let's begin. Number 1. Sanji used Diable Jambe long before his Germa Powers Awakened. If Diable Jambe came from Germa Powers, it makes no sense Sanji would have access to them before putting on the Raidsuit and awakening his abilities in Wano. In Wano and Egghead, Sanji's eyebrows change directions depending on whether he's using the Germa Powers or not, meaning that he should not be using them at all before Wano because his eyebrows never changed direction prior to wearing the Raidsuit. There are so many context clues like this that theory channels will pick up on and tell you about, only to conveniently forget and ignore them to peddle whatever their new agenda is. Also, just a heads up, the far more offensive half of this theory is that Sanji's powers come from Germa science. Like, that's the worst bit of it, I think. We'll get to Lunarians a bit later. Number 2. Judge still considered Sanji a failure despite seeing him use fire powers. The scientists in Sanji's backstory even say he's just a normal human, and he was until he put on the Raidsuit. The counter-argument is Sanji was slowly unlocking his Germa powers one by one, and stuff like his hardened skin and switched eyebrows only appeared once it fully awakened. But that idea is debunked by this fact. If Judge wanted to give Sanji fire powers, he wouldn't call him a failure in the scene. He would have said, "Oh my god, it worked." Number 3. Sanji's Diable Jambe is clearly fueled by his emotions, made clear by his own dialogue, how Hell's Memories works, and the author's own words in the SBS question corner. This is where the theory would begin the character assassination if it came true. It's such an obvious contradiction, I'm shocked the theorists never bring it up. If Judge succeeded in removing Sanji's emotions, how would he use the fire powers fueled by emotion? It makes no sense. It'd be like making a gun without a bullet chamber or a flashlight without a place to hold batteries. 4. Judge clearly intended for Sanji to become stealth black to fit the Raidsuit and the old Germa Comic Strip. Lunarians, as far as we can tell, cannot turn invisible, nor use lightning or poison or any of the other abilities used by the Germa Siblings. And it's incredibly unlikely given that those abilities were never hinted at for King and the Seraphim. Even when we have a whole arc where science is a focal point, and we have actual Lunarian clones running around fighting everyone, none of the half-dozen scientists on the island bring up the possibility that they can turn invisible or spit poison or anything like that. One of the most common counter-arguments I hear is unsurprisingly in the form of more theories. There's one where all the Germa are based on different races, which I would again say falls apart. Yonji's unique abilities come from him being a cyborg with extendable arms. We have yet to meet races that match any of the Germa kids. The only solid case you can make is Niji being based on the Minx, but 1 out of 5 is not a strong case, and even that one is questionable. If Niji is part Mink, does that mean he can go Sulong? And again, the ability Sanji was intended to get was invisibility. Lunarians can't turn invisible. If anything, they should be arguing Sanji is based on a fishman like Zio. In fact, Queen's own theory for how Diable Jambe works is that it comes from a machine part, which actually better explains the Germa's powers than the idea that they are based off different races. After all, Queen wasn't modified at birth. He gave himself cyborg parts after the fact to copy Germa, which would explain Yonji's hand and how the Germa don't have access to their full abilities without the Raidsuits. 5. Lunarian fire has certain rules that do not apply to Sanji, i.e. the speed mode and fire mode. Lunarians can only move fast when fire is off and only have enhanced durability when it is on. Sanji can be both fast and on fire at the same time. He also was not given godly Lunarian durability upon unlocking Diable Jambe. And after he does get the durability boost, he uses it to create blue flames. You would think that if this was him awakening to Lunarian powers, it would resemble King's attacks more, but it doesn't. Some argue that Judge designed Sanji to do both and to be an improved version of a Lunarian. But that still falls apart because of our last point. Why would Stealth Black, the Invisible Man, have fire powers? 6. Many people cite the Germa's durability as proof because Lunarians also have enhanced durability. But both of these groups clearly work differently. Most notably, the Germa kids have to bend and snap back into place after strong attacks, while King does not. Also, the siblings have enhanced durability 24/7, while King's drops alongside his fire. King and the Seraphim's durability is also clearly far more impressive as well. They're compared to Kaido, and in fact appear superior to him in this regard. Considering Sanji can pretty casually injure Yonji, while 200 chapters later Zoro struggles to hurt King despite being able to hurt Kaido earlier on, should tell you that these two abilities are on two vastly different levels. These are just minor inconsistencies, and I do think inconsistencies involving power scaling is forgivable, especially in a manga as long and sprawling as One Piece. But it exists nonetheless and is another context clue that should tell you that this theory is false. 7. If Sanji has Lunarian DNA, Why doesn't he have silver hair, black wings, or dark skin like a Seraphim, who we know have Lunarian DNA? The reveal of the Seraphim makes the persistence of this theory even more bizarre. People cite the fact that Vegapunk worked with Lunarians and that Judge worked with Vegapunk to mean that Lunarians must be involved in his research somehow. And maybe it was in some roundabout way, but we have seen cyborg Lunarian clones that do not look like Sanji, and their fire abilities and durability are in line with King's, not the Germa siblings. Some people have said that this would fit with the idea of Luffy giving every minority a token spot on his crew, and while that's not exactly wrong, I personally think it's kind of scummy and lazy to introduce a new race and then retroactively turn Sanji into one of them, even though he looks and acts nothing like them, and call it good Lunarian rep for the Straw Hats. Number 8, and this is a big one. There are no shortage of human characters that can use fire powers with little to no explanation. Zoro, Luffy, Kinemon, Fosa, Idio, Kabuji, and Pearl from East Blue, just to name a few. It's incredibly unlikely that all of them have Lunarian DNA. This point brings out two of the worst branches of this theory, the Fun Police, who we'll talk about later, and the Seraphim replacement eugenics theory. I'm serious when I say most of the counter-arguments against my petty tirade are just more theories. Sanji Lunarian is stupid, but it's easy to see the temptation for it. Two guys have fire powers, so maybe they're connected. But one of the weirdest theories I've ever heard is that every human who can use fire-based attacks are descendants of Lunarians. So Luffy, Pearl, Kinemon all have Lunarian blood, and same goes for everyone who's kinda strong or really big or just plain kind. While the Celestial Dragons are the only purebred humans and therefore are weak and evil. You know, I get that the Celestial Dragons are cartoonishly evil and obviously the super racist villains, but using race-based reasons to justify the existence of a racist group is kinda racist and would go against the themes of the story. Well, again, just taking a lot of the whimsy out of the setting just to explain guys who are really tall or can use a fire punch. Also, many versions of this theory got hard debunked because we've seen kind Celestial Dragons like Mijagard. And recently we've met really strong Celestial Dragons. And even before we met Lunarians, we had both kind and weirdly strong and tall Celestial Dragons in the Don Quixote family. Dofi is 10 feet tall and most certainly a pure-blooded human going generations back. Honestly, you can make a whole video based on how this fandom discusses eugenics. In a story about how found family is a core theme and that the greatest source of strength is willpower, people ignore that to say things like Luffy has top tier genetics and he was always destined to be a top tier. And he's also secretly Robin's sister because we need to justify how close these two are. Thank you, Randy Troy. Even though as a child, Luffy couldn't even fight off normal goons like Higuma. Where's the top tier genetics here? Yes, he has family members who are really strong, but in the exact scene where we learn how Garp trained, we're told nobody is born a hero. That strength has to be earned. Sabo's father is just some snobbish rich guy, but Sabo is every bit as strong as the king of the pirates' son, or the grandson of the hero of the Marines. Big Mom's parents were normal people and they gave birth to a monster capable of slaying giants at age 5. The only consistent thing about power level genetics in One Piece is how inconsistent it is. But people act like it's a rule that must be adhered to and followed. At least among humans, I understand different races will have different averages like Lunarians are yacked all heck, but direct family relations seem to have little to no bearing on your power level or your EVs or your IVs or your potential whatever, however you want to phrase it. And even though Big Mom's a mutant genetic freak and has 90 kids, none of them are even half as strong as her. They range from normal people like Pudding to Katakuri, one of the top 50 strongest people on the planet. People point at tons of other flimsy examples like Zoro being a descendant of Ryuma, even though there are at least 2 families descended from Ryuma in Zoro's hometown, and Zoro was by far the strongest guy to come out of it in generations. And we've seen his journey from the bottom. He didn't have some special bloodline powers in East Blue, and I doubt that he does in Wano. The purpose of his connection to Ryuma in the King fight is juxtaposition. King is shouting about how cool his race is and how physically superior he is, while betraying the legacy of the Lunarians by giving into despair like Kaido. Where Zoro gets stronger by remembering the words and wisdoms of his village elders, not because he's genetically inclined to be better at swordsmanship. In the Mr. One and King fight, Zoro is losing until his mindset changes. To cut nothing means to stop obsessing over destructive power and to find things worth protecting. And to master a cursed sword means to stop fearing them and to embrace them. Which is why Zoro stops resisting Enma and tries matching its output instead. It's about how living up to the spirit of your heritage or legacy is more important than your DNA. That's why so far cloning and eugenics has been presented as largely evil, while inherited will and found family is presented as the coolest thing ever. Luffy doesn't need to be related to Nold and Kalgra and Whitebeard and Roger and Oda in order to inherit their will. Koala can learn fishman karate despite not being a fishman, and similarly, Big Mom can learn giant techniques despite not being a giant. While also just being nearly as big, because why the hell not? Their admiration for these races has motivated them to imitate them to a degree of success. And that's kind of a beautiful message that gets erased if you headcanon Koala as part fishman. And it's made pretty clear that hockey is more important than having a cool devil fruit or being born a certain way. Your willpower is far more subject to nurture than nature. You can tell me that's untrue, type your eugenics comment down below, but this is the ideal One Piece portrays. The only exception is that we're told you have to be born with Conqueror's Haki, but it looks like a conqueror can come from anywhere. One Piece presents a setting where discrimination based on race and appearance makes absolutely no sense, even less sense than it does in our real world. The character designs and visual storytelling tells you that discrimination is silly. Even if the fanbase doesn't realize it, I've seen it take effect on them. When Flampe started making fun of Katakuri's mouth, they started making fun of her weird pear-shaped body. Where do you get off insulting Katakuri when you look so ridiculous? That's the joke. Everyone in One Piece looks so silly and ridiculous that none of this discrimination is really consistent with the world. Some humans just have horns or are just really tall, or have funny faces, long noses. It's ridiculous, it's cartoony, but that's intentional. Pudding is called a freak for having a third eye, while normal humans can have insanely long noses or really long tongues, or look like Patrick Star, and nobody bats an eye. Because on paper, they're just fellow humans. That's why different groups have different methods of discrimination, because there's no real logic to it. In spite of giants facing discrimination from humans, giants will discriminate against other giants for similarly illogical reasons. King Harold thinks ancient giants are barbarians, relics from a bygone era of war. But Little Lors Jr. is this sweetheart. He's this kind little guy, and he only fought in Marineford to save his friend, like all the other Whitebeard pirates. Characters like Moria, Mary, and Hannibal don't seem to face any discrimination whatsoever for having horns. Kaido's a bit of a weird case because we're not sure if Oni are their own race or if it was just because he was really strong and scary himself. But regardless, it's not consistent across the board. But giants will discriminate against you for having horns, or for just being born outside of Elbaf. We've never seen humans discriminate against others for merely being part of a different island, unless maybe there is some specific vendetta between the two islands. But on Elbaf, there's Elbaf giants and not Elbaf giants. One Piece exaggerates how illogical discrimination is by simultaneously downplaying the visual differences between races, while highlighting individuality through cartoony character designs that exaggerate differences within people of the same race. In addition to zooming in on the ignorance of the majority and the entitlement behind the elite who perpetuate and benefit from discrimination. Now obviously all stories are different and will highlight different things. You can probably attribute a lot of how the fanbase talks about eugenics to people conflating One Piece with Dragon Ball. A story where it seems like the stronger you are when you conceive a kid, the stronger that kid becomes. To be transparent, this was most likely due to power creep and because Goten being a Super Saiyan is just plain funny. But I think when you compare the two, One Piece clearly cares a lot less about who gave birth to its characters. One Piece presents a very optimistic and positive message that gets ignored because people have to talk about eugenics in every story like it's Pokemon. Now obviously they understand that One Piece tells you discrimination is bad, but they don't appreciate all the ways it'll say this. Sorry if you weren't prepared for this subject when entering this video with this goofy ass title. But let's get back to Sanji being a Lunarian, okay? One of the dumbest counter arguments is we need a better explanation for Sanji's fire powers. Diable Jambe being fueled by emotions is too goofy. We need science and concrete lore, dude. Look out boys, the fun police is here. Sanji using fire because of his emotions is no less goofy than Zoro creating tornadoes with swords or Django having hypnosis powers because he ate a weird mushroom. One Piece is goofy and loose with its character's abilities, that's all that needs to be said. If you don't like how loose and weird One Piece uses its powers, that's perfectly fine, but simply disliking that aspect is not evidence for a theory. So many of these videos talk about how they think Sanji's explanation about his fire coming from his passion is too silly or too lazy or something to be suspicious of. These people simply have no whimsy in their hearts. They don't even want a logical answer to Sanji's powers because if they did, they would see how many holes Sanji Lunarian has or would at least acknowledge them. They just want an explanation that sounds logical. One Piece's goofy, cartoony verisimilitude is consistent from chapter 1 to the current day. If you want to make a hyperlogical theory, you have to take that into account. If you want to be suspicious of Sanji's fire, you must also be suspicious of every other character with fire powers, including Pearl and East Blue, whose fire powers also comes from his emotions. You must be suspicious of Zoro creating tornadoes and cutting mountains, of Frankie being powered by cola. It's just not an effective way to engage with the story. Number 10. One of the most common pieces of evidence for Sanji being Lunarian is his talk with Queen. But notice how Queen did not call Sanji Lunarian. He deliberately says that he is not a Lunarian. And in general, Queen is a character with cause to be mistaken anyway. He says, "I know you're not a Lunarian, you must be a Germa cyborg freak." He assumes all of Sanji's powers must be the result of Judge's experiments. He does not acknowledge that emotions can have power because he, like his former colleague Judge, is a dick. Queen is acting as a stand-in for Germa and Judge. He has all of their abilities and acts the same way they do. They all use signs for evil, abuse their power, and hit women who rub them the wrong way. It's actually kind of clever because due to the nature of Sanji's character arc in Whole Cake Island, he couldn't prove himself stronger than his siblings to Judge, because that would indulge Judge's standards. He believes that value must come from power, but the arc shows off all of Sanji's qualities that Luffy values that Judge sees as a burden, leaving Judge confused as to why someone would go through this much trouble for Sanji. And the person who wanted him would soon become the 5th Emperor, someone of similar standing to Big Mom who Judge was desperate to join. Sora didn't compromise her health because she thought Sanji would be stronger due to having emotions, but because having emotions gives you other great qualities like kindness, empathy, and passion. Having a scene where Judge glazes Sanji and apologizes for not seeing how strong and cool he was would have defeated the point, and been really corny. But now that we're in Wano, Sanji can prove to the reader that he surpassed his siblings by rejecting the Raidsuit and using his emotions that Sora risked her life to give him in order to defeat an amalgamation of Germa tech. While Sanji is getting stronger due to awakening his Germa powers, he made the decision to stop halfway, giving up the invisibility, the power he personally cared about most, in order to keep his emotions, by extension Diable Jambe. And ultimately, it was and always will be Diable Jambe that gives Sanji the edge he needs to defeat his toughest enemies. Sanji's a character defined by low self-worth. His life was expendable next to Zeph's. He constantly risks his life for others. Not just women, but men too. In his childhood, he was abused and told he was the runt of the litter. He didn't ask for help against Khalifa because he can't bother other people with his problems. His development is shown in Wano when he's in a similar situation. Instead of pretending to fight and putting up a brave front, he calls for Robin's help, because he understands that his friends value him, and he can best help them by playing to his strengths. Something he once told Usopp but didn't internalize himself. Against Queen, he chooses to remain himself because he knows Luffy values Sanji the pervert chef more than Stealth Black. You can critique this line of dialogue for making Queen look like a fool. He's been in the New World for decades but can't comprehend emotion-based powers despite abilities like Haki and Foxfire style existing. Sanji's Diable Jambe, which represents his fiery passion, love, and anger being tied to his Germa abilities, is pretty much character assassination, as it goes against his character arc in Whole Cake Island and Wano, because his emotions are what set him apart from his siblings. Sanji crushes the Raidsuit, decides he won't go further with his family powers, and then gets a power-up to Diable Jambe. The one interpretation of the Lunarian theory that makes any sort of sense while leaving Sanji's character intact is if Sora herself was part Lunarian. Personally, I think it would be needless and still contradicts points 5 and 7, and there are absolutely zero hints that Sora is part Lunarian. But as long as Sanji's Diable Jambe is something he got from Sora and not from Germa science, it wouldn't be character assassination, because it could still represent his passion that his mother gave him. But still, I believe the story is better off not doing this, simply because this plotline is pretty darn great for what it is and hammering Lunarians into it doesn't get you much. I have no expectations to end bad theory making with this video or any video. You simply can't fight the ocean. Frankly, some people want bad discussion, and bad discussion gets attention and just snowballs from there. I simply want to help some people think about and value stories the way I do, and try to have fun doing so. I'm sorry if I sounded rude throughout this video. I'm not criticizing the right for bad videos to exist, I just want to explain why I think they're bad. If you believe Sanji is part Lunarian, please reconsider your position on this topic. If you have a comment disagreeing with me, I probably will not respond, especially if it's covered by the video or my original copypasta. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.